The run-up is a do list and should be completed in order, step by step, to ensure all items are completed correctly.
Parking brake is set, the circuit breakers are all in, mixture is rich, throttle...
Prior to taking the active runway, the before takeoff flow pattern is completed up to, but not including, the final checklist item, aircraft lights. When verifying the flow pattern with the checklist, the pilot shall state,
"Before takeoff, briefing complete, lights are on standby," and we'll verify that.
Use of the told card printed from Ames is designed to expedite your before takeoff briefing. It has been organized to include the same elements and sequence from the cockpit briefing section in the printed checklist.
Takeoff briefing. Our takeoff runway is runway 17 left. Takeoff distance is 1,100 feet. Runway length 3,901 feet. Liftoff speed is 55. Initial climb speed is 74. Initial heading and altitude is 2,500 and runway heading. Course and heading will be standard UND departure procedures. Destination is the Crookston Airport. Emergency below VR will perform the emergency below VR checklist. Emergency above VR checklist. Any questions?
When taxiing onto the active runway for departure, the pulse light must be turned on during the day, and landing and taxi lights must be used during night operations. The pilot now states,
"Before takeoff checklist complete."
During the takeoff roll, the pilot makes the following airspeed callouts. When the airspeed tape begins to move, the pilot announces, "Airspeed alive."
Cleared for takeoff. Airspeed's alive.
Once airspeed reaches 40 knots, they must announce,
40 knots.
Once obtaining the calculated rotation speed, the pilot announces,
Rotate.
Workload permitting, the climb flow is normally completed at 1,000 feet AGL. Flaps are verified up, and the pulse light is on during climb for day and night operations. Cessna recommends the mixture remains at full rich at any altitude below 3,000 feet. Above 3,000 feet, the pilot may begin to lean out the mixture to enhance engine performance. Upon completion of the flow, the checklist is verified.
All right, climb checklist. Flaps are up, mixer's rich, lights are set. Climb checklist complete.
During the climb, the pilot must make the following altitude callouts. For example, today's flight will cruise at 2,500 feet on the altimeter. Beginning 1,000 feet below the desired cruise altitude, the pilot announces
1,500 for 2,500.
With 500 feet remaining in the climb, the pilot announces
2,000 for 2,500.
Once they level off at the 2,500 foot mark, the pilot announces
level 2,500.
After setting the cruise power, the mixture should be leaned. To access the lean assist feature, press the engine soft key, then the lean soft key, followed by the assist soft key. Once this screen on the engine indicating page is active, begin slowly leaning the mixture until the EGT peaks and the temperature shown is a negative value. Then, enrich in the mixture until the peak EGT value is 0 for best economy, or continue to enrich in until the temperature is 50 degrees rich of peak for what Cessna has termed recommended lean. Next, select Pulse Light Off. If in-flight visibility is less than 5 statute miles or traffic congestion is high, the light will remain on. Once the remaining cruise flow items are complete, the checklist is verified.
We'll verify that. Cruise power set. Mixture is leaned. Aircraft lights. And pitot heat is off. Cruise checklist complete.
The descent checklist shall be initiated upon the commencement of the initial descent to land and shall be completed prior to 5 nautical miles of the selected airport of landing. Again, the pulse light is to be turned on during day and night operations. The flow is to be verified with the checklist following the completion of the flow pattern. During descent, the same format for altitude callouts used during the climb is again required. For example, If today's flight is descending to 2,500 feet MSL, beginning 1,000 feet above the desired altitude, the pilot announces
3,500 for 2,500.
With 500 feet remaining in the descent, the pilot announces
3,000 for 2,500.
Once they have leveled off at 2,100 feet, the pilot announces
Level 2,500.
the before landing checklist must be initiated prior to midfield downwind or 1 mile from the runway threshold if entering on a base or final leg. During daytime operations, the pulse light will be selected on during the before landing flow pattern. At night, the landing and taxi lights will be used. The flow is to be verified following the completion of the flow pattern.
Seatbacks most upright. Seatbelts are secured. Fuel selectors on. Both mixtures rich. Chem power 12 volts off. Before landing checklist complete.
In order to satisfy the stabilized approach criteria, a final check must be accomplished prior to landing and prior to reaching 100 feet AGL by verifying the final status of the flaps.
Flap set full. Final check complete.
Do not perform the after-landing flow pattern until the aircraft comes to a complete stop, clears the runway, and clears the hold short line. During the day, the beacon and strobe light should be the only lights which remain on. At night, beacon and nav lights. However, any lights may be used to increase visibility should an unforeseen vehicle approach your aircraft.
Dispatch, C-13 back, no discrepancies.
The shutdown and post-flight checklists are do lists. A thorough post-flight is just as important as a thorough pre-flight. Remember to complete your post-flight procedure using your checklist every time. Now that we have watched an entire flight's checklist procedures executed during single pilot operations, let's take a closer look at how do lists and flow patterns are performed in a crew environment. Although you will be evaluated as a single pilot during your commercial training here at UND, CRM procedures are required on specific lessons during the multi-engine training course, and crew operations are an integral part of the CRJ course. You and your instructor are encouraged to occasionally function as a crew during your single-engine training. Practicing these checklist procedures now will result in an easy transition to crew operations during your multi-engine and CRJ training courses, or wherever your aviation career may take you. During crew operations, it must be predetermined who is assuming the responsibilities of pilot flying and pilot monitoring. Here at UND, the student will generally assume the pilot flying role. As with single pilot operations, two types of checklists exist: do lists and flow patterns. When completing a do list as a crew, the pilot flying will call for a specific checklist at the time it needs to be performed. For example, the pilot flying will call for the engine start cold checklist. The pilot monitoring will begin at the top of the checklist and call out each item in order. The pilot monitoring then waits for the pilot flying to perform the corresponding checklist action and then call out the appropriate response. The crew then continues step by step in this fashion until the entire checklist is completed.
Alright, engine start cold. Throttle. Quarter inch open. Fuel pump on. Mixture. Rich. Then idle cutoff. Fuel pump off. Propeller area. Clear. We're clear right. Straight left. Clear. Magnetos. Start. Mixture. Rich. Throttle. 1,000 RPM. Oil pressure. Oil pressure's in the green. Amps. Positive. Low volts annunciator is extinguished.
Once the entire checklist is completed, the pilot monitoring will announce
Engine start checklist is complete.